Good morning, everybody. We're live here on a Wednesday morning on RAS YouTube, looking at all of the games in NFL Week number 5 with the preview Q&A. Appreciate everybody for stopping by an hour earlier this morning. Have a couple things going on this morning, so we have to push it back a little bit earlier to keep it consistent here with the Wednesday morning previews. Jay Karma in Brighton early with the good morning. Good to see Michael Montero back as well. We saw Devin Barth, Chris Gray. We also had Jason, a lot of people in, familiar faces. Good to see. If you're joining this after the show, the time stamps down below will allow you to jump game to game. You'll get the thoughts on each and every game. You'll get to jump through the preview, find all the information that you want for each game. There's a little bit quieter live show, so all of you guys that are watching within the live chat, going to have to help out with a lot of questions as we go throughout the show. If you're watching this after as well and you want a question answered, now with the Shorts platform on YouTube, they have an option where if you put a comment in the video down below, I can answer directly with a short after the show. And it actually really helps out the video, as do thumbs up as well as subscribe. So lots of changes going on with YouTube video, lots of changes going on with Twitter video. So that's the thing. If you have a question after or you have thoughts on anything you heard during the show, leave a comment for the video. Then I'll be able to respond to that right after. Very good morning to you as well as we get close to 100 people here on the live stream. All right, here we go. With week 5 means we finally have the return of tables. We'll pull up some market power rankings here. 4 weeks into the season, now we're starting to see a lot of different content coming out, a lot of tables like this. This is from InPredict. Ben Baldwin posted every week. We have a lot of aggregate rankings that come out that we can talk about, a lot of strength of schedule, a lot of games being played. We can look at a lot of these. And so when we look at this, just things that come to mind initially, I think when you're looking at the top 6 teams, makes a lot of sense. Bills have been dominant. 49ers have been dominant. The Chiefs, despite not having their wide receiver group settled whatsoever, have looked really, really good, especially on the defensive side. Cowboys had the big injury to Diggs, a little bit of defensive shuffling, a very easy schedule so far for them, but have looked really good. Eagles, we've yet to really see at their peak. They have really not been pushed so far. So a lot to see from the Eagles yet. And then we have the Dolphins, which, of course, that offense is on a different planet at the moment. So I don't have any disagreements with any of those 6 being at the top of the league. When we get to this middle chunk, I think I have some more defined thoughts. And so when we're looking at the Ravens, Lions, Browns, and Chargers, I think the Ravens are interesting. Back-to-back weeks, they've played a backup quarterback. And you think about Baltimore as a whole, they've had a lot of injuries themselves, offense and defense. And I think sort of the impact of those maybe, especially on the defensive side, has been disguised by the opposing quarterbacks that they have played. On the offensive side as well, they've got away with a lot of breaks. And so when you think about an offensive scheme that's been changing from what they were last year, a very sort of distinct style under Greg Roman, now into something that was supposed to be very different with Todd Monken, the fact you have multiple offensive linemen down, you have multiple wide receivers down, you have multiple running backs down, just the fact that they haven't had to been pushed so far, and they've got these breaks from the backups that they faced. Maybe it's a third backup quarterback in a row for them this week with the Pittsburgh news. Interesting to see the Ravens so high. Browns, I think of this group when we're looking at the top 10 specifically, the top 2 tiers, by far the most unsettled at quarterback. And that's me giving Jared Goff some praise as well. And so I think that Cleveland at 9, certainly interesting, but I've seen them very high all season. When we get to that middle chunk, Vikings, just insanely bad luck in every way. And I know everyone's calling for the regression that they were going to have inevitably after what they did last year with the 1-score games and the turnovers. We're now looking through 4 weeks. I'm going to get my numbers mixed up because there's been so many, but I believe it's 6 turnovers inside the opponent 5-yard line, 8 turnovers inside the opponent 25. So that's just all-time bad all the way around for the Vikings with that luck so far. And so they're sitting right in the middle here, currently 13th in these market ratings. That with the way that offense is trending, certainly could move a little bit one way or the other. Bengals, numbers-wise, EPA, success rate, both sides of the football, that's a bottom 5 team through 4 weeks, which is crazy to think about. We'll see what they turn into with Burrow. We'll talk about them in a little bit. Packers is an interesting one. So many injuries again for Green Bay. So that's interesting to see them at 15th. We get to the middle class. Really no disagreements here. Maybe if I'm looking at these and sort of one doesn't necessarily match up It's the Saints, but we'll talk about why in a little bit. We get to the bad AFC teams. Again, would agree with all of those. I think there's maybe disagreement. Some people might have Denver a little bit higher, despite how they've played out, just because of the offense. And then for the bottom four, how do you rank Carolina, Arizona, and Chicago at this point? And obviously the Giants have nothing but O-line injuries. So an interesting back and forth within the market. Other tables we have that are interesting: strength of schedule. A lot of stuff here is really starting to pop out. This is from Sumer Sports. Eric Eager has really got things in a very good spot over on that site. Some fantastic tables and stats that are free for everybody to use. Really like their ELO stuff, but also really like their strength of schedule numbers as well based off of that. And so this is showing which teams have played the most difficult strength of schedule so far through 4 weeks. And you kind of see the correlation here, right? Jets, Patriots, Rams, Giants, lots of teams that have had it really tough. The one that would stand out, obviously, Detroit, when you think about the wins that they've got against some good opponents so far throughout this season, really starting to stand out. You can say the same about the Cardinals, but I'm not there whatsoever with the Cardinals on either side. I get they're playing hard. I get that offensive numbers so far. It's right around top 10, but I think that's just a reach overall for the Cardinals. And then on the other side, you have, this is the bottom half of the league in terms of easiest schedule. Mentioned the Cowboys way down at the bottom, right? It's been super easy for the Cowboys, yet they still have that bad loss to Arizona on that week where everything was flipped upside down. And again, with strength of schedule, you can look at it in kind of two ways. You sort of have to parse it out. You take a team like the Niners and you look at how great they've been so far this season, and you're like, well, they're benefiting from the easy schedule. Look how easy it's been, the second easiest in the league. I mean, they're hanging 30-plus points every single week and putting up some ridiculous efficiency numbers. So you have to think about that a little bit as you go. The reason I sort of singled out the Saints, you see them at the bottom here, third easiest schedule so far, and that offense is struggling. The defense is still holding teams under 20 points week after week. First time since week 9 last year that they conceded more than 20 to the Bucs and Baker Mayfield this past week. You're starting to see that defense probably not as strong as it was rated preseason, and that offense has a lot of questions too. And so a lot of money against the Saints in the market the last couple of weeks, and I think that's kind of showing exactly what's going on. Connor brings up a good point as we transition into the games here. Saints and Pats playing each other this week. We'll get some answers on both of these teams. There's been two things that have frustrated me a lot about the season so far. First and foremost, the injury news has been really weird. Teams have been making weird decisions late in the week. The concussion protocol and the changes there have made it really difficult to sort of anticipate what is going on as well. And so that's led to some bets and some decisions that have gone the other way after injury news late in the week has switched it around. So that's been frustrating. Second thing, this has happened a lot where you have a team singled out, or there's injuries, or there's something that you look at during the games on Sunday and you're like, okay, next week, this is an area I want to oppose it or fade it or bet against it or something. Just this is a spot I really like because of something that happened. And then you get the matchup the following week, and it's like the worst team possible to take advantage of what happened is matched up against that team. Saints and Pats is a perfect example. So Connor mentions it within the strength of schedule, within the power ratings and where these two teams are. But specifically with the Pats, we'll talk about it, the massive injuries to the defense. It's like, here you go. This is a spot where you could really fade the Pats again for a second week. And then you have the Saints on the other side. And it's like, well, what are the Saints going to do to exploit that? So we'll talk about this game in a little bit. Continuing to go down, Jake Carmick, Cowboys versus Ravens, exacta 100-1 both ways. That's a bet right there. Gerald Morris, Seahawks will be contenders when O-line injuries are resolved. The one thing I'd say there, when they were without both of their starting tackles, was it the Carolina game 2 weeks ago? The performance that the replacements had were two of the best pass blocking and run blocking performances of any tackles all season long. And then obviously against the Giants weren't overly tested, even against Wink, who was blitzing a ton. I still haven't looked at the exact numbers from that one, so correct me if I'm wrong on that one. But they've actually had really good stand-in injury replacements. And I don't know if maybe O-line injuries are over-exaggerated at times because you think about what's going on in Houston, and that's a rookie quarterback in a new offensive system that's on to like 6th and 7th level offensive linemen within the depth chart. and they're making it work just fine. So interesting thought there for sure. Michael says Niners over Chiefs in Super Bowl. Book it. Good rematch from a couple years ago. Phoenix Antique Frames. Okay, here we go. How are the Jets a dog here? Wilson built some confidence versus KC. Jets good running backs and Den secondary giving up 78% completion rate. I actually thought it was higher than 78. I'm certain you're right in that, but kind of reflects how bad this Broncos defense has been. We'll talk about that one in a second as we get to the game. Moonfish, I like keeping the Ravens on that second line, keeps them hungry and pissed off. Sounds like a Ravens fan coming through from that as well. Jets versus Broncos is gonna be lit. That's what the kids are saying. Adam Orphan, some teams with cluster injuries have actually performed quite well. Seattle and Houston, exactly what I'm talking about. Is this more an indictment of the opposition game plan or something else? I think it honestly could just be overrating offensive line injuries, overrating defensive line injuries. Tough to match up when you think about how it sort of aligns every play. If you have a left tackle out, the teams adjust with an extra tight end or adjust their sort of protection schemes to make up for that and then play off it elsewhere because the teams know that the defense is going to attack there. So they have to scheme around it. So there's extra attention. It's interesting. But yeah, I've noticed that a couple of times so far this season where that's been a very real thing. Steelers Mitch will beat Lamar outright this week. I'm with you on that one, Michael. Mike Sack says Pats just trade back CJ Jackson. This is a big one we'll talk about in a second. So let's get to the games. A lot of questions about the games. Keep them coming, guys. Appreciate it very much. Starts off tomorrow night with the Bears on the road at the Washington Commanders. This one right now, depending where you look, Chris and Pinnacle are 6 for the Commanders, minus 05. Total 44.5. This was at 7 yesterday morning before there was some serious buyback on that one. Could have been Monday. I'm getting my days mixed up as we get into the season. Every day blends into the same. Whether it was a fake, it certainly looked like it within the market when this was 6.5. And there were some early moves at certain spots that brought it up to 7. Everywhere else went up to 7. And it was there for like minutes before those 7s were taken back the other way. I think 2 things here sort of stand out. Maybe not so much at 6 as it currently stands. A lot of you will see 5.5s, but if there was something that came from all of that Bears disruption a couple of weeks ago that showed through in the most recent game against Denver, as bad as that Broncos defense is, this is a Commanders defense that has really underperformed the first couple of weeks of the season, that maybe you get a bit of carryover from that for Chicago coming into this game. You also have Washington off of an overtime division game, big matchup against the Eagles, now having to turn around on the short week, going from these spots where they were big underdogs to now laying the touchdown, needing to cover by margin, needing to build the big lead. Just, it's not something we've seen Washington do. Even against Arizona, where they were at the same price point, that was a challenge for them. The Bears also potentially get back help within the secondary. Injury report today will come out and give some more clarity to that. Big name to watch there is Eddie Jackson. But it could be a little bit of an uptick for the Browns. And I'm saying uptick. We saw the rankings 32nd. Commanders aren't much ahead. And it's like, what if there was something there that the Bears put forth that gets Fields playing closer to what he was last year and much better than what we saw him in the first 3 weeks? And so to me, it's just a big role change. It's a big game coming off of what they did on Sunday on a quick turnaround for the Commanders to be in this spot, laying this big of a number, just seemed really big. At 5.5, not really interested in Chicago. When you think about if you're betting 5.5, what do you have to make it? You're probably having to say that this is 4.5 if you really see some upside within that number. And I think that becomes a very fair price. And so that's kind of how I'm looking at this one. Definitely could not bet the Commanders at this. If it comes down, opinion would change. But I think maybe we see something again for a second week from the Bears offense all the way around. Jake Karma says, too many points. Don't trust Howell. I don't trust the defense on the other side either. Again, it's a lot for this Commanders team to get through. Connor says, feels like the 6 is essential. Yes, would never advocate for the Bears at 5.5 here. But I really think that bet at 7 on Chicago was very, very real. So Daniel says all Bears games so far this season have had at least 44 points. I like the over again, but what is the effect of Thursday Night Football on totals in general? I don't have an exact answer for that, or what the specific scoring is. I think if you're thinking about it this year, outside of that Eagles-Vikings game, you'd say that they're trending a little bit lower than usual, but I don't have anything specific on that as well. Connor's leaning to that over as well. Think runs all over Washington. Fields does. Washington can throw in the Chicago defense. Everyone's been moving the ball in the Chicago defense. No question there, but watch for those secondary injuries. If that comes back, it gives the Bears at least some help back there. That'll make a big difference relative to what they've played. Mahomes, Wilson, who's having quietly a very good year. We mentioned Sumer Sports. You go back and he's like 7th or 8th in the QB rankings. The Broncos offense has been sneaky efficient, but it's been a couple of tough opponents in a row for the Bears. And now they get Howell, which is a little more within their weight class, as good as Howell has looked, so to speak. Let's go to Sunday. Jags, Bills, London game. Second London game in a row for the Jags. I don't know how to personally sort of price this and what that impact might be. It's kind of an unforeseen scenario so far in terms of betting NFL. So do you give the Jags a bump? Would be curious in the chat how you guys look at this, because they were there. They get to stay over. Do you take away from the Bills in that spot? Is it something that might be detrimental to Jacksonville, having to go through another week of prep and circumstances staying over there? A really tricky spot within that regard. But there's no doubt when you're looking at this matchup, what are we going to get from the Jags wide receivers? Last week, as we talked about here on the show, a lot of people were pointing the finger. I'm saying film guys, a lot of guys that really are great at breaking down these games, pointing the finger at Jags wide receivers, not helping out Lawrence. A lot of 3rd and 4th down luck going against the Jags as well. They get a little bit back in terms of sort of coming back to 50-50 in that regard over the Falcons in that win. But it was another game, guys. The wide receivers for Jacksonville just struggling to do much for Trevor Lawrence. You still have the injury to Zay Jones. That's problematic. A tough spot here. Up to 5.5 for the Bills. The Bills are just dominant right now with their offensive changes, more 2 tight end usage. They're way above league average in that regard. 3 wide receiver sets have come way down. Josh Allen off the best game of his career in terms of completion percentage versus expectation. This offense for Buffalo is just humming at the moment. And it's something that I look at this Jags defense is really struggling to defend. The question is, just with this being the London game, with the Bills in a different spot, coming off of the big win against Miami, which absolutely was significant within the division. You look at the Bills' schedule and how that shapes up, especially with the loss to the Jets week 1 within the division and how well Miami's playing. You can't overstate how big of a win that was for Buffalo. And now it's the travel spot to London to play the Jags. So tricky. As Connor says, lots of unknowns, a really tough game to get a full grasp on for sure. The Buffalonians, is that what they're called officially? Devin says they're going to travel to London. I feel like they're everywhere and anywhere at all times. So that's certainly maybe some truth to that. Connor says, I think the Jags should receive about a 0.5-point bump, but hearing a lot of Bills fans will be traveling in London in general, will be leaning towards rooting for Buffalo. I saw a poll, I don't know how official it was, that said that the Jags were among the least liked teams in the UK in general. I don't know the specific target audience for that poll, but that was interesting considering how often they play there and how frequently they've been over there as well. Jordan says big Brian Robinson game tomorrow. He's had his carries kind of split and divided up. I know he's had some big runs and stood out, but that's a tough backfield to gauge in terms of who is going to stand out. If Desmond Ridder didn't suck, the Falcons probably could have beat the Jags, and a lot of that goes down to the overall issues that the Jags are having with their wide receiver group and how many struggles there, drops, everything like that as well. A lot of numbers here from Jordan. Bills team over 27.5 on DK, averaging 34.7 a game this year, 41 since New York Jets. London games average 44.6 a game. Good bet, or is over 48.5 better, or pass on both? Woof. Bills team total over. The problem that I have, I guess, with a Bills team total over is, and I know the Miami game obviously inflates that. They had a couple turnovers that set up short fields that made that 48 probably realistically look a lot like a 33-34, just with how easy that came. The Raiders game too, they got a very specific defensive look all game that they were able to move down the field. The Bills' offense is incredibly efficient so far this season, down to down with their scheme changes. But it is important, I guess, in your mind to divide what the Bills' offense has been, which is this deep downfield, explosive offense in seasons past, to think about how now priorities have changed a little bit within the team. It's McDermott with more pull on how the team operates overall now that he's in charge of the defense, wanting to set things up for the defense. It's the Bills with 2 tight end sets and a more traditional ground game. And so I can't help but feel like, especially off that 48-point win, these totals are getting pretty high for the Bills overall on their team total side. Very good offense, very efficient, but there's kind of a different intent within this offense than we've seen from years past. And so, again, there's been 2 weeks in a row now, numbers inflated up pretty high overall, taking advantage of some bad defenses, benefited from a lot of turnovers, benefited from short fields. Not saying it's a bad offense, but it's a different intent overall for the Bills. So I don't want to talk you out of that, but it's just something to keep in mind as you go forward. And this is about the Jags. They're London's team. This poll suggested otherwise. Again, I'm not taking the stance here, but I was looking at the poll and the Jags were like 26th. And so I don't know. They play there all the time. Like, I get it, but I have to look it up. And it wasn't from a weird account either. It was like an official account of some sorts. I'll find that and maybe tweet it out, or if someone's looking, they can find that as well. But that was certainly interesting. And then Connor brings up a point, have to be afraid of a letdown. Yes, like I agree with that, especially into the second half with how the Bills are operating on offense. Okay, let's get to a couple games quickly as we're 21 minutes in. Have to wrap it up by 9, so we'll put through a couple games here pretty quick. Please keep the questions coming. Appreciate it very much with almost 200 people here on the stream. Texans, Falcons, 3.5 look ahead, gets to pick. Falcons get smashed at pick. The 3.5 to 2.5 was on the reopen. Certainly an adjustment for what we've seen from Houston. I got to tell you, though, like, I'm looking at Houston, and again, it goes back to the top of the show. We're talking the offensive line injuries. They lost another O-lineman for an extended time so far this week. There maybe is going to be more injury news that goes against that O-line too. Like, there's just a lot of injuries piling up. CJ Stroud is playing fantastic. We saw another good game from him, another good performance. We saw him have another couple big completions when the Texans had a comfortable lead to inflate the score. He's hosting team dinners with the receivers who apparently love him, right? It's all looking really, really good. DeMeco Ryans getting a ton from his defense. You look within this matchup, you can almost say that Ryans versus Smith is a bit of a coaching mismatch. However, like at what point do we kind of just take a step back here and say this was a Texans team that showed no signs of life in the preseason, was lined as one of the worst teams in the NFL, has now gone through a couple weeks against relatively weak opponents, had some big showings, had some big explosive plays, especially when games were out of hand or they were coming back, inflates the number a little bit. We're seeing this drastic kind of market trying to catch up to how good Houston has looked, to all the hype around CJ Stroud. Like, when does that kind of level off? And like, I get that we haven't seen a lot from Atlanta, but Atlanta's kind of playing to expectation in a way. We weren't expecting them to run away with games or have a dynamic, crazy offense that was hanging huge numbers on the board. It was going to be a solid defense with Smith, who loves to run the football a ton, just kind of getting through games against a weak schedule. When you look at this adjustment, and now certainly we think back to where it was yesterday when it got down to pick, I think Atlanta was a very easy decision to make it that number. But even now, like, we're on the other side of 3. We're adjusted down. This is a lot in favor of Atlanta, in favor of Houston, pardon me, in terms of respect for how low this has been bet. So that is certainly something that stands out. Connor says, doesn't Houston feel like a bubble that's about to pop? Like, I don't even know what's made Houston a bubble necessarily, but I agree with this sentiment. We went from, like, there was pure worry about CJ Stroud to now, like, everything's fine. He looks great. Is he a top 10 quarterback? It just feels to me like it's a lot, and they're getting away with a lot despite these injuries. And maybe the quality of play outside of Tunzel on the offensive line was so irrelevant and mediocre anyway that it doesn't matter. Maybe that's possible, and these backups are just as good and they're making it work. But I tell you, it's It's a lot. But again, we go like the Houston O-line is a mess. Absolutely. But they're getting away with it so far as well. So I don't know. I could only look Atlanta in this spot. Panthers on the road at the Lions. Detroit laying 9.5. Someone in the chat, there's always Lions fans that are sitting around everywhere. I'm guaranteeing there's Lion fans in here. Within the Jared Goff, Dan Campbell era, have the Lions ever been this big of a favorite against anybody? I haven't had time to go back and look. My impression looking at this all week has been that this is the biggest number I've ever seen the Lions laying within this group of players. They're certainly playing to a level that deserves it. The strength of schedule has been tough. They've been performing well. Lions look really, really, really good. But this just, again, it feels like a big number when you're starting to look at them as laying 10 points. If there's a team justifiably through 4 weeks, so you could say that they're willing of laying this many points, it's probably Carolina. What was really telling to me about the Panthers was yesterday there was a report that came out that said they are hunting for a wide receiver number one, like a top tier wide receiver, willing to trade a lot for it. As we've been talking all week, all season, all preseason, right? The big issue with the Panthers, these wide receivers can't get open. It's brutal. When you look at what they're trying to do downfield, it doesn't matter if it's Young, doesn't matter if it's Dalton. These guys just aren't getting open. A number one who can find separation would really change this offense as well as the play caller. This week, you're kind of getting the same thing. And you think about some of the injury issues within the defensive side for the Panthers, like you would expect the Lions offense to have a lot of success within this spot. So I really think this is the biggest number the Lions have laid within this era. How high is too high against the Panthers? Titans on the road at the Colts. Tennessee flipped through 0 this morning. They're now a 1-point favorite. This was Colts -1 for much of the week. Total is still at 42.5. Here's something that stands out. B-Dub says, what do you think about Richardson plus 600 rookie of the year? Any value? Believe it or not, through 4 weeks, Anthony Richardson leads the league in explosive plays. He's created more explosive plays than any other quarterback through 4 weeks. The Colts offense has really never got going, which is interesting. And there has been a ton of praise quietly for how Shane Steichen is calling plays, the concepts that he's calling, the aggression that he is introducing with a lot of the routes. There's been a lot of praise for Richardson, not just from his legs, but from his arm too. When you match up against the Tennessee Titans, the only quarterback that we have not seen have huge success downfield is Joe Burrow, who played last week on one leg and couldn't move from the pocket. I'm looking at this game with a total of 42.5. And I'm like, how do the Colts not find some big plays with the way that Steichen is calling plays, with the way that Richardson is running this offense? They're not going to have a lot of success running. I mean, Jonathan Taylor might come back. That would be a massive boost. You have him with Zach Moss. The Titans very, very good up front. But Shane Steichen is doing a hell of a job so far, despite the record, despite the results. This is a team I'm looking at in Indy that's kind of really underperforming relative to how people might be looking at them. When you look at those ratings, again, we can bring these back up. When you're looking at where the Colts are, you got to go all the way down to 25th. But this is an offense that's being talked about in much higher regard that is just kind of finding a way to sort of click and get working. And I think the Titans might be a really good opponent for that to happen. And on the other side, I mean, the Colts defense matched up against Henry in this run game. This is probably as good as we're going to see the Titans offense look so far this season as well. So yeah, I'm kind of intrigued by this Colts offense the next couple weeks, but especially within this matchup as well. Jay Karma says the Titans own the Colts. That's absolutely, I think, very true. Again, I don't have the numbers for that one off the top of my head, but I'm with Connor here. Over nothing in this game. You're looking at that 42.5. That's certainly intriguing as well. Devin with a good question. What price would you play Richardson anytime TD at when Taylor returns? So without Taylor, I was advocating for Richardson to be right around even money. And that was using the justification that Jalen Hurts within that system behind a really good O-line, obviously with that goal line play calling, he was right around -115, 120 per game. So I thought Richardson with a worse O-line, but a better mobility than Hurts, having the same play caller in Steichen justified even money. We saw that come to the market last week. He scored again. No offensive play caller in the NFL runs quarterbacks more inside the red zone than Shane Steichen. So Richardson's still going to get carries. Jim Bob Cooter still wants him to run more. It's going to be a ton of carries. If Taylor returns, Roger suspects he's on a pitch count, 100% better than anyone else Indy has. The usage for Taylor is going to be interesting with Moss getting like 98% of snaps. But you start to think about Steichen and calling these plays, and Richardson plus Taylor plus Moss as a rotational guy. This could be really, really good. So this is a interesting one. Devin got the plus 140. It's just not going to last for long. So to answer the question, if you get Taylor back, we probably see Richardson drift back out to like plus 125-ish because Taylor's always priced really high as a premium for scoring an anytime touchdown. But those two within the red zone, that's going to be deadly for the Colts to use. And this is a team that just keeps churning out explosive plays despite not really being respected for it or viewed as such. Giants, Dolphins, Miami 11.5. Total in this game 49. When you look at the total right now, lit up across the screen. So this was 51 earlier this morning. Got down to 50, and it looks like there's been most likely a release on the under based on how every single book has moved within this down to 48.5. So there's under money. You start to think about why. Giants offense, complete mess at the moment. We're waiting on news for Andrew Thomas. If he comes back, that certainly changes prospects for what the Giants offense could do. But it's an offense that's struggling. Even in catch-up the last couple of weeks, it's been ugly. Outside of the Cardinals game where they hit some big plays against the defense that's just extremely over-aggressive. But against the Seahawks, nothing was happening. Against the Niners, nothing was happening. Against the Dolphins, you think about the Fangio scheme and how it plays. Not too dissimilar from the same style that Seattle or San Francisco plays. Really built to sit on that lead. The Giants fall behind. I think it's going to be tough for them to keep moving. Miami on the other side, just the best run game in the NFL, deadly against this Wink Martindale blitz. I mean, there's nothing that the Giants are going to be able to do to comfortably contain this over the course of the game. And so you can kind of see why this is coming down. You can see why the number's so big, went from 9.5 out to 11.5. These are the type of games that have been on the look ahead through the key, getting bet up, where you start to see later in the week, there's been resistance on some of these and it's come back the other way. This is one where maybe there's a little bit of an exception for that. And I don't know. Maybe the injury report helps the Giants a little bit, but this is a spot where I think the Dolphins might continue to take a little bit of money. I don't think there's a big change line move wise the rest of the week. Maybe it ticks up a little, but this is maybe the one exception to where of these bigger numbers that have been bet up through a key that go through 10 this year that have seen money come back the other way. This one might not be one of them, but that's just as bad of a matchup for the Giants as there could be on both sides of the football. Saints, Patriots, 1 is the current point spread for New England. Total in this game is 40. I was mentioned earlier, the loss of Christian Gonzalez, I saw this morning, it is for the season. As I was making the coffee, I got the underdog alert. That loss for Gonzalez from that defense cannot be overstated for its importance. He has shut down in his rookie debut, really, the first 4 games of his career. He shut down some of the best wide receivers on the other side of the football for New England. Now you add in the fact that Matthew Judon in the defensive front is hurt as well, and he's out too. This is becoming ugly for the Patriots. So they scrambled to get J.C. Jackson, a guy that obviously knows that system well, who had his problems with the Chargers. He's going to fit in very, very quickly. But this is 2 just huge blows to the Patriots defense. And where I'm speaking about some of the frustration this season, like you're looking at these injuries and the impact that it's going to have. And you're like, okay, this is the week to fade the Patriots. But then you get the Saints offense. Last week, they targeted Alvin Kamara 13 times. The completed air yards for Derek Carr was 0.4. Like, to think about a quarterback in 2023 who completes 23 passes, has 37 attempts, and his completed air yards is less than half a yard. Like, there's serious problems with the Saints offense. And we went through the strength of schedule stuff earlier in the show and talked about how they're overperforming. Money has come in against them the last couple of weeks. Like, it's all ugly for the Saints in this spot. But what are you getting out of the Patriots on both sides now, especially with those injuries? So it's a potential bounce back. as we're seeing in the Saints in the chat here. But boy, I can't be comfortable backing New Orleans in this spot as much as I want to with those New England injuries. Just can't get to it. Next game, Ravens on the road at the Steelers. It's Baltimore as a 3.5-point favorite at Pinnacle, 4 everywhere else across the screen. We see that Kenny Pickett's going to be at practice today. I would be very surprised if he is able to play after that knee injury. The initial report and how it was spoken about sounded and was referenced that he would miss time. It's now coming back the other way to where it's like, well, he's going to be at practice. We're going to see. I think it's going to be a Trubisky game. I think we're going to see the offense forced to be different because now you're without Pat Freiermuth. His replacement was named. I forget who it was, but maybe an interesting fantasy look. But I think a couple things specifically about this game when you're looking at the number. So this was 2.5 on the look ahead. These Ravens-Steelers games, they're always locked in at 3. You guys know how it usually gets priced. This was adjusted up quite a bit. And I start to wonder, even if the Ravens get another backup quarterback here in Trubisky, is the drop-off from Pickett to Trubisky that significant? My answer would be no. And if you start to see this Ravens team continue to get sort of ratcheted up price-wise here. Last week, the Browns, before the Watson injury, took money. That game was adjusted up through pick, got as high as Cleveland -2.5, right? Nobody wanted a piece of the Ravens till it got to 3, when there was a very real sort of bet that came in on the Ravens that moved everything. There was the news combined with that, right? It went back the other way, the Ravens close favorite. But it's the Ravens now getting ratcheted up price-wise after beating backup quarterbacks, after beating up teams with a lot of injuries. And all these issues that the Ravens have been disguised in a little bit. And last week was probably the spot where they should have been exposed quite a bit against that Browns defense. But again, you look at how that game played out, and it's the Ravens on 3rd and long getting conversions. It's the Ravens finding Mark Andrews in the back of the touchdown on a jump ball as the first half expired time-wise in kind of an odd play and getting breaks going their way. And so despite them being forced to sort of abandon all of these preseason plans and how they wanted to switch into new OC, they've just been getting away with it. And now we see them power rated 7th and 8th in the aggregate ratings. We see them getting away with these backup quarterbacks and injuries on the other side. I can't help but wonder if it's gone a little bit too high despite how well Lamar has played. And so, again, you're still looking for Ronnie Stanley, who was doubtful last week, could be back. That certainly helps the Ravens O-line, but there's still defensive injuries. There's still other injuries within the backfield. It's just a spot where I feel like the Ravens have been pushed up a little bit too far relative to who they've played, how they've played, and whether or not that should be overly justified or not. I don't necessarily agree with that, and I don't think the drop from Pickett to Trubisky that may happen is that much overall. When it comes to the Canada stuff, it's all weird. He's got to go. But in terms of them sort of being forced to play different, now if you're without Deontay Johnson, you're without Freiermuth, you have a different quarterback in there in Trubisky. Not only is there the element of his legs that are introduced, that the Steelers have been willing to use in preseason games past where he's got in. That's a different element that you can add into this. But I also think you're going to see Trubisky much more willing to throw not just to the outside numbers and make these really difficult throws. I think it's kind of going to force the Steelers to find the middle of the field, set up things a little bit differently, and maybe this whole team and offense as a whole is forced into a bit of a different game plan that'll be a lot more efficient. And so there's some upside in that as well, I think, that could potentially stand out as well. Let's continue on as we're looking at Bengals Cardinals. Here's another crazy one, as we're at 3 even money for the Bengals. You look at the Cardinals this year, offense is top 10 in EPA per play. Defense is bottom 7. I think they're right around 25th or 26th. If you match that up against the Bengals on the other side, Cincinnati in both instances near the bottom of the league, offense and defense. There was a video that came out where there was analysis being done of Joe Burrow within the pocket. And it's like, he can't move. He's stuck. He's looking at one guy. He has to get the ball out. 2.2 seconds. He's throwing the football against the Tennessee Titans. And he's still under pressure, damn near every drop back. And so if you were to look at this game a couple of weeks ago, right? You're like, you're going to get the Bengals -3 against Arizona. Every single one of the 181 people currently on this stream would have been running to bet as much as they could on Cincinnati. We now have seen 4 games, and we've got more insight into the Burrow injury to where obviously the perception of that has changed. We're now looking at a spot where this was 8.5 on a look ahead. We're down to 3. When we think about the Rams game a couple weeks ago, we're seeing essentially similar movement. That Rams game went as low as, I think it hit pick at one point. But what that took to get that low was like severe uncertainty that Joe Burrow would actually play in the game. And so now we're seeing the same movement against a team in Arizona that I think everybody would say is much worse overall than what we've seen so far from the Rams, seeing the same movement, and like nobody wants any part of Cincinnati. And so wondering if this has gone too far is kind of like an easy thing to say at this point. And now it's just more of like surprise and shock that we haven't seen any Cincinnati money come back in. So very interesting within this spot. If the Bengals lose this week and Burrow looks as bad as he has all season, I don't know where Cincinnati goes from here. This is a team in a serious, serious spot. Jay Karma, what happened to the Bengals O-line play? Orlando Brown? Well, he didn't help much at his previous destination. So maybe subtraction by addition. I don't know how you want to look at that. But boy, it's like Burrow's taking as short of dropbacks as any QB in the league. He's getting the ball out quicker than any QB in the league. And he's still facing ridiculous pressure rates. It's all bad. Does anyone know if T is trending to play? I saw he wanted to, but not sure on the latest word. I've not seen anything this morning. I thought that was more unlikely than likely based on what I saw earlier in the week. We're seeing Cardinals. Okay, I've got to stop it now. We need a sort of broken down pronunciation of your first name so I can say it right, not butcher it. If you want to put that in the chat, it'll help me out a lot. I don't want to be rude by butchering it, but I appreciate all the comments on everything. Cardinals, baby. Dobbs and his wide receivers are showing out. This line opened 4.5 on the Bengals, got bet down to 3. I can't see it. I love Burrow, and I hope that they show up. Yeah, it's of all the games we've seen so far through 5 weeks, this is the craziest market movement overall. Now, before we get to the next one, Luke Miran says, Bump, is there a way to enable the transcript function on your future live streams? Helps things if you miss live event or want to go back and read for a specific portion. I have to figure out, Luke, I'll put it in the chat, but if you go through the Chat GPT plugin through Chrome, you can get something that immediately transcribes every YouTube video on the side panel. I forget exactly what it's called, but search for like Chat GPT YouTube transcription Chrome plugin, and it'll do it automatically in real time for any video you're searching. Like it takes 15 seconds. It gives you the summary and the transcription. There's probably something I can do on my end. I'll look for that and I'll fix it. But I would highly recommend using that as well. Let's get to the last couple of games here. Eagles on the road at the Rams. Connor asks, what is with the Rams love? I have no idea because Stafford left the game last week with a hip injury. He's going to play this week. I don't know. Kevin Cole, who's brilliant at covering the NFL, has the Rams 9th in his power rating. When we're looking at just the market ratings overall from Ben Baldwin, the Rams are up to 16th, 1.3 points worse than an average team listed in the middle class are the LA Rams. When we look at the strength of schedule, the Rams have done all of this against the 3rd most difficult schedule of teams in the NFL. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know what to think of it. I don't know how to process it. But in a very similar manner to the Bengals, when you're looking at that price and you say, oh, my God, how can it be so low? What on earth are the Rams doing taking money against the Eagles? And like I think about Hitman, he was on the Rams earlier this week with a release. There were other guys who have been on the Rams as well. I don't get it. I don't agree with it. I don't see what's going on here. I think what was bet on the Rams preseason in terms of their win total under all of the concerns with all of the offense and the defensive depth. I think that is much more true still than what the Rams are being bet and presented as based on their first 4 weeks. Nakua's been amazing. You've had a big outburst from Tutu Atwell, which has been amazing. Cooper Kupp could potentially return. There's still uncertainty if he's healthy enough to do so. So he could definitely stand out. Like I get that this offense is a lot better than what we did, and Stafford is playing fantastic. But I'm just surprised that We haven't seen a lot. And this is a fair question from Devin. What have the Eagles done? Every game they've played has been close, and they should have lost a few of them. And so Connor says the Eagles are the most overvalued team in the NFL. So let's go back to these ratings, right? The Eagles are 5th overall, 4.5 points better. It hasn't been a huge adjustment from where the Eagles have been relative to the prior this season. The Rams have gone from 31st to 32nd up to 16th. So you have the Rams with a huge upgrade. The Eagles have been relatively stable. When you think about what the Eagles have done so far this season, so week 1, they play Bill Belichick, who had the full offseason to prepare to stop the mobile quarterback that has given him problems. Did his best to do that. The Eagles got a couple turnovers. They end up winning that game. Week 2 was the Bucs game on Monday Night Football. That was a spot where the Eagles, that was dominated that was week 3, pardon me, but they dominated the Bucs for 3 quarters and then just put the game away in the 4th. Tampa Bay did nothing. Week 2 was the Vikings on Thursday Night Football. The Eagles had so many injuries in that Vikings game on their defensive side. They were missing Blankenship. They just lost to Kobe Dean. They lost Maddox during the game. They had another corner that was out pregame, right? It was just decimated with injuries. And still, that was a pretty comfortable game for them in the second half in terms of putting it away, despite the Eagles' offense. They dominated on the ground, but there was still within the passing game, there were some issues that were missing within that. And then against the Commanders, I would say the Commanders game for the Eagles was the worst game that they played all season long, but still the Eagles didn't turn it over. There was nothing like jarringly bad from what the Eagles have done. To me, I'm looking at the Eagles so far this season. They really haven't been impressed outside of the Commanders game. And when they were, they looked great. And they've been getting by in wins in kind of unusual ways relative to what they did a year ago, just really, really comfortably. And so when you see this comment, it says the Eagles' passing game has been atrocious. In 3 of the 4 games, the Eagles didn't really need to pass the football. And so like I'm looking at the Eagles and it's like, well, they've been getting by. They've been winning games. They've been doing what they've been supposed to do. When they get a lead, they sit on it, try and run out the game. They just haven't been pressed or pushed, and they're getting by undefeated despite having new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator, all this turnover within the play calling. They're just making it work. And so if we're saying that like the Rams have had this big upgrade, but the Eagles are stable, I don't know if I can downgrade the Eagles for getting by in all of these spots. Whereas like the Rams arguably have just been a surprise. They haven't necessarily performed better, and they're getting this huge bump. So boy, I don't know. I think the Rams love has gone a little bit too far, similar to the Houston Texans. I'm not quite there yet, and I'm looking at this number, and it's certainly pretty short so far on the Eagles. Brian G, the Eagles were up 20 points against the Vikings. That's what I mean. It's like you can look at all of these games and be like, it wasn't as dominant as what we were used to last year when they were just playing the easiest schedule in NFL history. But I don't know. Like, I don't know why there's doubt or disrespect for what the Eagles have done when you consider the circumstances coming in. I think there should be much more surprise and doubt in what the Rams have done so far, and if they can keep to play to that level. Jets, Broncos, Hackett goes back to Denver. It's the where's the I think his name is Ryan, right? In the chat. Where's Ryan with all his revenge game stuff? Because it's Paul, pardon me, Paul Enzo. I was waiting for him to put in the Hackett comment about Hackett going back to Denver. Here's what I'll say about the Zach Wilson performance. It was arguably the best that we have ever seen him ever in an NFL game. I don't know the specific numerical impact on the EPA specifically for the drop fumble that he had at the snap that was honestly put on him. But even with Wilson playing his best game ever that we've ever seen him against a very good defense, he still finished with a negative EPA per play. And so you take that fumble out, he's probably above. But there was a tweet that compared Patrick Mahomes, and that was arguably one of the worst Mahomes games ever, versus one of the best Wilson games ever. And it was still like a stark, drastic contrast in how the two performed. And so you're looking at this, sure, the Jets offense maybe gets a bit of a bump and an upgrade. Like, I get that there was more life after what we saw the first couple of weeks, and it was against a very good defense. So you're giving them respect for that. The defense, when given an opportunity to play for something, certainly stood out. And you think about how bad the Broncos defense has been and all the calls for changes there. Like, you could see how the Jets could have offensive success. I get that. But I wouldn't discount how good the Broncos offense has been quietly either. As I mentioned earlier in the show, Wilson on Super Sports, their QB ratings, he's like 7 or 8. There's a lot of really good metrics underlying for the Broncos offense: yards per drive, plays per drive, touchdowns per drive. Like, this Broncos offense has quietly been kind of sneaky good despite injuries to wide receivers, going through a lot of issues and problems that they've faced as well. So that's been a bit of a surprise. You'd think, matched up against this Jets defense, there's probably a path where both of these offenses can find success and move as well as they can. So for a Broncos total to still be below 44 does seem a little bit low. I know the over's been bet, but that would be my take there. Chiefs Vikings, really fun one to talk about. Chiefs a 4-point favorite. This was 6. The Vikings have taken money. You think about the Chiefs, they play the really tough game, Sunday Night Football, that goes to full 4 quarters against New York. Tough game all the way around for them, where they're still looking for answers at wide receivers. Now they go and play the Vikings in Minnesota before next week playing the short game, Thursday Night Football, on the road in Denver. It's kind of a tough spot overall for the Chiefs. It's a tough spot when you consider that they still can't figure out this wide receiver room. And if you look and sort of think about this, Flores, huge blitz rate. Flores, a lot of zone coverage behind the blitz. This is a defense that Mahomes would typically set up and just destroy. But is he going to be able to do that as effectively as we've seen him in years past without a clear answer at wide receiver? Now, we just talked about Wilson having success against this Chiefs defense. This is a very good Chiefs defense. However, this is a very, very good Vikings offense as well that I think can really test them. Ryan Roberts brings up the main point. Luck regression has to come at some point from Minnesota. It's insane. The red zone turnovers, the turnovers inside the 5. It's crazy. This is kind of becoming the falling knife situation where it's like, when is it going to bounce back? Doesn't matter who the Vikings have faced. They've been able to move the football. I think they do the same here. We've seen the total come down a little bit. It got really high. These mid-50s totals are just huge for any NFL game, especially a Chiefs team that has a really good defense and struggling with their wide receivers. So that makes sense to see that coming back. But boy, I tell you, the bets on Minnesota so far this week, when you think about the spot for KC, the struggle with the wide receivers, make a little bit of sense. No way am I jumping in at 4. You can only kind of start to look the other way for KC, but that early money in the market makes an interesting sort of case within this. Sunday Night Football, 2 games left. Cowboys, 49ers. San Francisco, 3.5-point favorite. They have been all week. The total hasn't moved at 45. I don't have a strong take here necessarily. I think that both of these teams, as we saw at the tables to begin the show, 2 weakest opposing strength of schedules. So neither team has necessarily been pushed. Neither team has been pressed. What does it look like when both of the offenses are? We saw the Cowboys 2 weeks ago in their loss against Arizona. They still moved the football downfield and did so quite well. They just couldn't get it in the end zone when they got into the red zone. 4 of 15 inside the red zone, the Cowboys are the last 3 weeks, which is pretty crazy to think about. The 49ers, obviously very good at defending within the red zone. And so how does that look for the Cowboys, who continue to get the ball inside the opponent 20, but just can't put points on the board? There are a lot of drives that have just stalled out late for the Cowboys that they've left with 3 points or 0 points because of a goal line stand. I don't know if the 49ers necessarily are the team that they flip that against, but in terms of this offense moving, it's looked consistent and great for the Cowboys, even in these games where they've just had to run it out. They've had some of these big blowouts that have kind of taken it away from them. So there's been a couple of reasons to look at this Cowboys team as having sort of offensive performances that should have been better than what the scoreboard indicated. On the other side, the 49ers, they're just putting up all-time efficiency numbers week after week within this offense. Purdy last week was insane against the Arizona Cardinals. And so let's see what happens with this total. It is at 45 currently and coming down. Obviously, you have upside with both of these defenses, but I think this is a game where both offenses can show through quite a bit. And then Monday Night Football, it's the Packers on the road at the Las Vegas Raiders. Somebody just bet the Raiders. We saw this was at 2. It is now at 1. And as I'm looking right now, every game on the screen has been lit up in favor of the Las Vegas Raiders. There was an article about how the return of Jenkins on the offensive line is going to change this offense for the Packers. I agree with that. This is a big health spot for the Packers overall. You think they played last Thursday as much time off as the team could have without having the full bye? That's going to make a big difference. This is as good as we will see the Packers offense so far through this season, just because of how the Raiders play defense. It's such a change from the last 3 weeks for the Packers after playing these man-heavy teams, Atlanta, last week in Detroit. They played New Orleans in between, right? Those are all defenses that just matched up so well against the Packers. Now they get the opposite scheme in the Raiders. So the Packers, you think about Aaron Jones, who's going to be back at 100%, no snap count. Christian Watson, going to be back 100%, no snap count. That's going to impact props. That's going to impact the Packers' offensive output. It's not going to be Love under duress, forced to throw deep downfield. That'll be a big change overall for the Packers. So I think that'll show through too. In terms of the Raiders, Jimmy G was still in the protocol. Let's see if he clears it, what the situation is there. Of course, we have Paul Enzo with the revenge games. These make me laugh every time. Last week, 70% of the offense for the Raiders against the Chargers went through Adams or Jacobs. And so it's basically a two-player offense at the moment. Let's see Jair Alexander if he's 100% good to go, because he's one of the few guys that could play man with Adams. Familiarity there as well. So there's going to be a lot that goes into that matchup too. I'm curious to see who bet the Raiders after I get off of air, but I went into this week thinking that the Packers were an interesting look for sure, just from the health and everything that they're getting back that's going to help them too. And so with all of that said, we've reached the end of the card. Someone's asking about teasers. I've not played or looked at any teasers specifically so far this week. If I had to look at a teaser right now on the spot, I don't know if the Jets are still live in a teaser. If you could go 1.5 up to 7.5, that would be sort of like the obvious leg that stands out. But then you would probably have to look at the Houston Texans as well as the other teaser, just because with that total so low, the expectation for points and how Atlanta runs, Atlanta just doesn't come off as a team that is going to do much to win games by double digits. I just don't think it's going to happen that frequently this season. So if you're getting a spot where you can now tease the Texans back up, that would be a good leg too. So I'd look at that one. Obviously tricky with how teasers are being priced at different books and handled overall. So that's something to think about. Have to get running here at the top of the hour in 3 minutes. There is discussion about having another one of these Sunday morning at 10:30 or 9:30 Pacific, right before kickoff for NFL. So it'd be 12:30 p.m. Eastern time. Let me know in the comments down below, more so in the chat, but in below video, if that's something you would tune into. We'll talk about props and everything right up to kickoff in the last 30 minutes. If that's something you guys would like to see as kind of a revisit. I've never done weekend content on Saturday or Sunday morning, but now with release shows off for a couple of weeks, we have some extra time on Saturday and Sunday morning. So if that's something you guys like, in the comment section down below, more so than the live chat, let me know. We'll do it like 30 minutes before kickoff, right up to kick, revisit everything, look at inactives, look at props, see what we can get from that. But appreciate everybody stopping by so far this morning. Let me know what you think about those thoughts. And we will see you guys tomorrow morning on the podcast. And then maybe we'll pop back on Sunday morning with the first ever Sunday morning live stream. Thanks again, everybody, for stopping by. We'll chat to you later this week.